to be interviewed. It's good to be here. So, I guess first off, who are you and what do you do at the Denver Voice?
Sure. My name is Sarah Harvey, and I am the editor of the Denver Voice.
In your words, what is the mission of the Denver Voice?
Our mission is twofold. One part of it is to create a direct economic empowerment opportunity for people experiencing homelessness. But we're also a publication. The other half of our mission is to create a dialogue about stereotypes around homelessness and then break down some of those stereotypes.
Where did the Voice begin?
So it's 20 years old now. Just last month we celebrated our 20th anniversary. And there have been a few different versions of the Denver Voice. The very first version was published in 1996, and it was more like a zine. And it was very much a volunteer effort. It was written by the homeless for the homeless. That evolved over the course of about a decade to become a little bit more political, and then kind of petered out in 2006, which I think is the nature a little bit of an all-volunteer operation. Although by that time I think they had a staff member who was paid a very small amount by some Dominican nuns, actually. Then in 2007, a Denver businessman named Rick Barnes decided to resurrect the Denver Voice. And he modeled that resurrected paper on other street papers around the world. There are about 100 or so street papers like The Voice around the world, and about 40 or so in this country, where there's a publication, and then it's associated with some sort of jobs program too.
And how did you get involved with this organization?
The same way that I think a lot of people become involved with it. I had recently moved to Denver. This is back in 2008. I was a couple of years out of college with a BA in English and was looking for something to do. I was walking across Capitol Hill and I met a vendor, and I bought a paper from him. I started talking to him, and just thought it was an idea that I just fell in love with. So then right away I contacted the then editor. It was kind of good timing too. I just cold called him and said, "Hey, I'd like to be your intern," and he said, "Oh, okay." I was brought in for an interview, but it was a pretty quick process. So I was actually the editorial intern 8 years ago, and then have been involved with The Voice in some capacity over the past several years until I became editor about 2.5 years ago.
And since you have been here, how has The Voice impacted the community?
I think so there's a couple of different ways of looking at that question. Last year, our budget was $125,000, which is very small even for a nonprofit. And since we don't really make any money off the sales of the paper, that'll go to the vendor. Collectively, our vendors made it was close to $186,000, and that's an estimate and a low estimate. But basically, for every dollar that we take in, we put about $1.50 back into the pockets, directly into the pockets of the people we serve. So that's a definite impact we make. I think one less tangible impact. Oh, and going back to numbers, since 2007, when we officially started up again with a vendor program, we've employed more than 4,000 people.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and we have about 50 vendors on average. People come and go. Sometimes people are just a vendor for a few weeks if they're passing through town. Sometimes they're vendors for significantly longer. But in the past 9 years, we've employed more than 4,000 people. So those are two concrete impacts that I can talk to you about. I think another way we make an impact is in kind of bridging the gap between different parts of the Denver community. So we hear from vendors all the time that as important as, so that one thing that's even more important than the money they're getting sometimes is this renewed sense of self-confidence and sense of self-esteem that they get from selling The Voice. They're no longer being just ignored by people who are passing them on the street, although that certainly still happens sometimes. But it's a chance for them to engage in their community again and to be part of a community and to maybe, depending on the interaction, teach their customers something about a side of Denver they might not have known anything about. So that's another type of empowerment that comes along with being a voice vendor, in addition to the economic opportunity.
Cool. Okay. How do you choose content, and who writes the content?
As far as the content of the paper is concerned, it's a pretty standard editorial operation. We're a journalistic operation. About 20% of our content comes from vendors or people experiencing homelessness, and they work with me to craft. Sometimes it's poetry, sometimes it's a little personal essay or statement, but they'll work with me where they have an idea, write drafts, we go back and forth. But then the other, about 80% of the paper, comes from freelance journalists or a wire service. Do you know what a wire service is?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that is something like, if you've ever seen on the cover of the New York Times or even Denver Post, there'll be a photo credit that says Reuters or AP for Associated Press. Those are big wire services. All of the street papers in the world have our own little nonprofit wire service. So sometimes I'm able to publish content from other street papers for free, if it has to do with something going on in Denver. But otherwise, it comes from freelance writers and photographers in Denver, for the most part.
There's a community aspect. That's cool. All right. And what kind of problems have you run into as a nonprofit?
I mean, there's certainly, every nonprofit has to work really hard to fundraise to make sure we can keep going, right? So that's always an issue and always a battle. We're always working hard to make sure we can keep our lights on and our doors open for the vendors. We've run into some obstacles that have to do with the changing environment in Denver. We used to have an office that was over by Park Avenue in Champa. It was at Park Avenue in Champa. But like it is the case a lot in that neighborhood now, the old building that we were in was sold. We couldn't find anything in that area that was comparable for rent. So we ended up moving here, which has been great. It's been a really good opportunity in this building, which is owned by Urban Lands Conservancy, so it's a cheaper rent, but we were part of the Denver gentrification struggle too. We needed a new place and could no longer find a place in our neighborhood that we could afford anymore. As an editor, same issues that every editor has to deal with. Writers missing their deadlines, something goes wrong with the printer.
And have you ever thought about branching out from articles that only pertain to homelessness and poverty, or kind of into other areas, and why or why not?
So we don't just limit ourselves to articles about homelessness and poverty. We tend to, so everything we publish usually tends to tie back to a social justice issue in some way. But we're a little bit broader in our scope than just homelessness and poverty. For example, although there's sometimes crossover, and I'll explain what I mean. In July of last year, we had an art feature on buskers and street performers, and some of those people who were photographed and interviewed for that art feature had experienced homelessness in the past, but not all of them. But it's a fringe or maligned community, which I think still ties into our mission of starting a dialogue and breaking down stereotypes. I thought of another challenge, speaking of that. So one that is maybe like a unique challenge to us versus other nonprofits, and it's part of our mission, but we're trying to break down stereotypes about what homelessness is or who it affects, right? We'll get calls to our office sometimes because customers have bought a newspaper and they're worried that the person they bought the paper from didn't look homeless enough. So they're calling us to make sure that they really bought a paper from a homeless person. Like, we get a bunch of coats donated from Patagonia pretty regularly, which is very generous of Patagonia, but people will see, and it's also very easy to have a smartphone now through the government's Lifeline program, and that's one of the first things you want to get when you're experiencing homelessness, right? It's like totally crucial for life now. So people will see someone though with like a kind of nice jacket and a phone, and they're like, I don't believe that person's homeless, and then it creates this space for us, though, as an organization to be like, well, let's talk about what homelessness actually looks like. Like, it's not the stereotypical guy who is dressed in rags with a long grizzled beard, and it affects a lot of people. Families are one of the largest groups of people experiencing homelessness in the Denver metro area, but they're more of a hidden homeless. You don't see them as much.
What is the next step for The Voice?
There's certainly, I mean, we've been talking for a while now about being able to publish more frequently. We have a lot of planning and a lot of fundraising to do before we're able to do that. But right now we publish monthly. It would be great to publish a newspaper every 2 weeks instead of once a month. I mean, it would just help vendors sell more papers, right? And also help retain vendors, and so that's definitely a goal. We've talked about trying to sell the paper in other cities. Again, we have vendors now who will go up to Boulder sometimes, but we used to have a satellite office in Boulder to distribute up there. We weren't able to logistically do that anymore, so we had to stop, but it's definitely something we talk about, being able to distribute in other cities again. I think we'd also like to, we've definitely in the past held sort of small business, I guess the best way to say this is like increase education opportunities for vendors in the office too. Like, we've tried to hold certain classes in the past, and I think there's definitely some more educational stuff that we'd like to do in the office as well. So all dreams for the future that we'd hope to do someday.
And kind of adding on to that, where do you see The Voice in 5 or 10 years?
Well, I hope within 5 years we would be publishing twice a month. And I hope we're still here. Really. I think it's pretty cool that we've managed to stick around for 20 years. I think one reason that is the case is that we've always managed to adapt to suit what people need in Denver, so I hope that we continue to do that.
All right, well, that's all my questions. I guess if you have anything else you would like to add, now would be the time. Maybe if you want, you could show some of the papers to the camera.
Sure, I can show you an example of the kind of stuff we publish. And I think one thing that is interesting that sometimes people don't know about our vendor program. They're always surprised to find it out, it seems anyway. So when people first sign up to be Denver Voice vendors, they get their first 10 papers for free. Then after that, they buy them from us, actually.
Cool.
And it's part of making it more of a micro business, right? It's more of making it their own sort of little social enterprise that they manage. And also is showing that vendors are investing in the program too. So it's really not a hand out, it's a hand up.
Cool.
And then after they get this first 10 papers for free, vendors buy the papers from us for 50 cents each, and then they sell them for a suggested $2. Quite a few report making a little bit more though. I mean, people will tip them too. So
do they set a price, or is it just a donation?
it's a set price. It's a set donation price, which is always printed on the cover every month. And that donation language has to do with our ability to sell or distribute the paper without needing sales permits. So as long as vendors are asking for a donation, we don't need a special permit.
Oh.
Yeah. So, but really it's not, the donation language is frustrating for me though, because I think a lot of times people might think it means that that money is going back to a larger organization, but it's not. It's going to that person. They're actually helping that individual directly. And a lot of people, when they find that out, they think that's really cool.
Oh.
So, vendors buy papers from us for 50 cents, sell them for $2 or sometimes more. That's theirs to keep. And then, yeah, our content. This issue is special because it's the December issue, so half of it is holiday wrapping paper. That's not normally the case. And some of these wrapping paper designs were either drawn or inspired by our vendors. Like this snowman one, which is one of my favorite ones, was drawn by one of our vendors. And then our graphic designer helped color it in. and turn it into a pattern. But so this is kind of a special thing for December. So
Cool.
reason to like buy 5, right? Instead of 1.
Yeah.
In addition to the wrapping paper incident, we've got our usual content though. We always have a vendor profile, a vendor we feature every month. We usually get some short personal statements, poetry, or essays from vendors. And then, like, here's an interview. It was actually done by me, but it could have been done by a freelancer. The guy from Denver who's on the current season of Survivor, he actually runs a nonprofit in Denver that ministers to homeless people.
That's cool.
I shouldn't say minister. It's not faith-based. But it's like he has a meal sometimes. He has coffee. People go and play games. So he does that in Civic Center Park every Saturday. Here's one of those wire stories I was talking about. It's an interview with a Greek fisherman who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize because he helped so many refugees. Here's a photo essay about the homeless sweeps in Denver. And then, yeah, we have events, we have puzzles. That's our publication.
Well, thanks for
Yeah, thank you for coming in. Thanks for taking the time to meet with
and
us.
thanks for having this organization and helping these people. It's great to see that there are people who care out there.
Oh, thanks.